Hello there, this is Jack with Let's Draw Today, and in this video we're going to sketch a toucan. We'll see how to sketch or draw a toucan on a tree, and we have our reference photo that you should see on the side of your screen. I also have some extra reference photos that might be useful in this particular drawing, and I do this in a lot of my drawings. For those of you that have seen some of my past drawings, that I'll often use these lines on my workspace. These we can call these axis lines, for lack of a better word, and I have a reference photo with these lines placed over it as well. And these lines are basically there to help us, just to give us some extra support when it comes to establishing our main subject within the composition and just getting the proportions right in general. It's just something there to give us a little bit of extra help. And it's not something that's necessary, but it's something that can be very useful just to help us get started, especially if you consider yourself a beginner. And then we have another reference photo that has simplified values. And when it comes to our shading, this can be very helpful just to help us break down the many different values that we see here into 5 very simplified tones. And it really helps us to understand where we should concentrate our efforts when it comes to placing the lighter values and the darker values. But we'll get into all of that later on when we get to the shading. We're going to keep this very simple. It's mostly going to be more of a sketch, but we're still going to create some elements of realism to just give it that realistic look that we know and love also. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started in this. I am starting with an HB pencil, and you can feel free to draw along with me if you want. Now, this workspace that I have is 5 inches wide by 4 inches tall, and that gives us an aspect ratio of 5:4. And it's something that I recommend doing if you're going to use this approach with the axis lines. And I recommend that you don't necessarily have to cut your paper like this. You could easily, if we double the each side, we would have at 10 inches by 8 inches. So, as long as you have that same aspect ratio of 5:4, and if you wanted to sketch that box in your sketch pad or on a piece of paper, you're welcome to do that too. But that's in place because that is the aspect ratio of our reference photo, and that's going to come in handy when it comes to us deciding where we need to place our contours. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to look at this upper left box, if you will, or quadrant, and because that's where most of our toucan's head, pretty much all of his head, except for a little tip of the beak, is centered or concentrated. And we're just going to use these lines just to help us figure out where to start placing our outline for our toucan. What I like to do is try to find the extremities of the subject. So I like to try to pinpoint where the upper edge might be. Now, if we look here on our reference photo, we see that the upper edge is this upper curve of the beak. And it's definitely not way up here, or it's not way down here either. We could see that I'm just going to use this printed version just to help us kind of pinpoint where things are. If we have an imaginary line right where that beak is, we can see that this imaginary horizontal line, it's pretty much more or less halfway. It kind of chops this segment, this axis line, in half. So that can be a good starting point for us if I wanted to just estimate, and it doesn't have to be exact, and put that imaginary line there. Okay, that tells us, okay, that's going to be the upper extremity of our toucan. And this is just to help us kind of box in or block in get that basic contour in place on our paper. Now, if I want to do the same thing here with the left edge, and I'm just sketching a vertical line this time. Okay, it looks like it is still kind of at the halfway point, but maybe if I look at these 2 points here, it looks like this segment might be ever so slightly longer than the segment to the left of it. So maybe a little bit more than halfway. So this is half. We're going to just kind of put it right about there. Okay. So we know our toucan is going to encompass this space here, and it's going to go no further than this edge right here. Right? So that gives us a good start with the head and the body. Now, if we look at the tail, the lower part of the tail, we could see that it is, if I sketch our horizontal line here, we want to see where it crosses this axis point. And it looks like it's pretty low down, so we could just estimate that right about there. So that helps us to box in where the toucan is a little bit more. And then for the beak, we see that it's just a little tip of it just past the axis line here. So just kind of bring that down. So we know that our toucan is going to be found in this space, pretty much. Now we could do other things as far as the leaves, and we're going to, the branch that the toucan is sitting on. And we're going to get into that too, but we don't have to be quite as precise with all of that. But let's get started with the basic shape of our toucan here. So we're just going to start sketching just some of the edges, the outer edges, to get things going here. Okay, we see that this upper beak kind of curves up and taps this imaginary horizontal line, and then we curve down into this space. And then I want to look also at the space that we have in between or underneath the beak here. And I just want to try to make a judgment as to how much space we have here, negative space we could call this, compared to the actual space that the beak takes. And I want to try to allow for that also as I'm sketching the shape of the beak. And as always, I want to try to be very loose and generous with my sketching lines here, because I might have to make some changes as we go along with things. I just want to get things started, but I want to give myself some freedom to make some mistakes and make some adjustments if I need to. Now we can look at some of these basic shapes that we have that make up the body of the toucan, like this. I can make some, I could look at this kind of round shape and say, oh, this is kind of like an oval shape for the body. And that could help me form my contour lines. But I'm kind of doing a little bit of I'm not necessarily identifying all of these shapes that make the toucan as I sketch the outline, and I hope that makes sense. That's something that we can do, but I'm just kind of using some of my intuition of the different shapes that I'm seeing as I sketch the outlines. I'm not necessarily going and sketching all of the individual shapes as I go along, but I'm using just some of the shapes that I see within our toucan subject just to help guide me along as I make some of these decisions as to where the contour outlines should go. Okay, so here's what we have so far, and I'm using several things to help me with this. I'm looking, as I'm sketching these outlines, I'm looking at our imaginary block and box that we have here. I'm looking at, I'm trying to use negative space to help me decide where a lot of these outlines should go. Like, for example, we see the negative space, and by negative space, I mean the space around the subject. Like, we're trying to draw the subject, the toucan here. The negative space around that subject, around this toucan, can help us a great deal decide where we should put our outlines. So here we have our imaginary block and box, and we have this negative space that's around the edge of the toucan, and I want to see if at all possible my negative space shape around that same area is more or less equal or close to what I see in our reference photo, and it looks like it's pretty close there. And same thing with the negative space underneath the beak, and again, it doesn't have to be exact, but we want it to be as close as possible, and it looks like it's pretty close. So for now, I think I'm pretty happy with that. All right, and that tells us that we're pretty much on the right track. Now, if we look at the space here on the top, along this top edge of the beak, this negative space right here, okay, it looks kind of like an equilateral triangle, and I want to see that mine is pretty much the same, and it looks like it is, so that's good. So these different areas around the outline, that they just help to serve as kind of confirmation that I'm on the right track. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and continue sketching some of this outline. Now we said the tail is going to come all the way down here, and let's go ahead and see if we can start getting that into place. Now, all along when I do this, I like to look for imaginary guidelines to help me as I do this. I already have some of these in place, like I mentioned, this one right here, to help us find those outer edges of our subject. Now we can also use these imaginary vertical and horizontal lines to help us place some of the other parts of our subject. And we can use what we already sketched to help us even further. For example, if I wanted to identify where this left edge of the tail should be, I could put an imaginary vertical line. I'm just going to sketch it right here on the paper. An imaginary vertical line right along here. And that's going to tell me, I want to make sure that it aligns this left edge of the tail. I want it to align with or maybe just to the left of where the eye is going to be. Now, so if I see that the eye is pretty close to the beak, and I may just go ahead and put that in place now, because that can help me with placing that left edge of the tail. And a lot of times, even though you see me sketching this, you don't necessarily, as you get better at this, you don't necessarily have to sketch these lines. I'm just doing it as a visual aid to hopefully better help you see what I'm talking about. But a lot of this, as you do this more and more, you can start to do this just mentally, and you don't necessarily have to sketch all of these guidelines that I'm putting in place for you now. But okay, so right along here is where we're going to put that left edge of our tail. You see that's going to come down to right about here. And we'll do the same thing for the right edge. Okay, we see that it pretty much lines up with the edge of the body here. So we know that it's going to come, that outermost edge is going to come to right about there. And then we can go in a little. And for the tail. Now we also have this, well, I'll go ahead and first of all start, I just started doing this outline, the white part of the body. So I'll go ahead and finish that. Okay, there's a curve that starts right about here. Okay, and then it comes up to there. All right. Now, and while I'm in this neck of the woods, we'll go ahead and sketch this bottom, or this edge where the upper and the lower beak meet. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser just to, I wanted to bring the edge of the neck in a little bit here, and I want to erase that first guideline so I don't forget that I don't want that to keep that there. Put a little more of a bulge on the upper part of that beak, because it's clearly sticking up more than the head here, and I might want to even bring the head down a little bit. Okay, so we were going to go ahead and was going to do that tree branch, but I'm starting to get a little bit distracted by getting into the details here a little bit sooner than I thought I would, but that's okay. I'm just sketching these lines that are defining the beak where it meets the head of the toucan. And we've got our little discoloration here at the tip. And all of these details here so far are just to the left of that vertical axis line right here. So you may notice that I am trying to be very light with my lines at first, but as I get a little bit more certain of that I have the proper placement of the edges, that's when I start to get a little bit darker as I go along, and just start to better define and shape those outlines. Okay, back to the branch where our toucan is perched. We're gonna look at this edge here, this top edge. You see is at a diagonal, and I'm looking again at the negative space that I have here created by this axis line and this axis line and the edge here. So I'm going to try to mimic that angle if I can. Again, it doesn't have to be super exact, especially since, you know, it's just sitting on a branch. The branch doesn't have to be 100% exactly like the reference, but we're trying to get it close. Right, and then we see the branch, it is in the foreground here, and it kind of blocks where the the part of our toucan where the bottom part of its body meets the tail, and we have that right here. So we're going to put our branch right here so it overlaps that connection. And we want to see where it comes down, and we see that it's almost near the end or the bottom of the corner of our drawing space here. And then we come up here a little bit, and now I'm going to flip things around a little, and I see this bottom edge. So I want to do the same thing that I did here. I want to look at the negative space. We kind of see like a triangle shape here, and we see the same thing over on this side. And this can help us to find that lower edge of the branch. We see a really long kind of right triangle here, and it intersects the axis line just a little bit left of the halfway mark. So this is our halfway mark. It's a little bit to the left of that, right about there. And then let's say right about here is where that kind of triangle shape for the negative space is created. So that helps to give us the lower edge. Then we can continue the upper edge of the branch just to make sure it maintains that same thickness pretty much. And I can continue that right along by bringing it down. And right about there, I think that does it. Now that we have our branch, we can start putting some feet in place. So the toucan can actually stay on this branch. Now, I can see, and again, this, if you're sketching this and you see that you're going to have a few things off from the reference photo, it's not necessarily going to be a big deal. But in the interest of trying to maintain as much accuracy as we can, I'm going to show you a little bit of a mistake that I just caught myself doing. I started to make the foot here. I started to create the leg sticking out, and I was going to put the edge of the foot or the toe right about here. But then as I looked at my reference, I see that we had this imaginary guideline that we put in place earlier that defines that left edge of the body. And if I bring it down, we see that the foot is to the right of this imaginary guideline. Whereas when I started sketching my foot here, you can see it's not to the right of this guideline. So that's pretty interesting. So again, not a big deal. I could keep it like that if I wanted to, but if I wanted to try to, anytime you're drawing realistically, and if you catch something that you can fix, because if you want to try to stay as true to that reference photo as you can, then that would be a good opportunity to just try to make that correction. It just helps you see things better. It helps your observational skills as an artist develop all the more better. So I'm gonna try to make that correction by just erasing that and seeing what I can do to improve it. Now I do see that this edge here, I can pull it in a little bit, and then I have an angle here that kind of tucks in to this guideline. So what I can do here is just kind of pull that roundness in a little bit more closely, and that can allow me to tuck that foot in a little bit more than I had it. and then just try to bring that curve in right about here. So now that edge of the foot is not surpassing this edge of the body. And just to enhance the illusion a little bit more, I can bring the edge of the body out ever so slightly, make it a little bit rounder, and then that'll keep that foot tucked in so it's to the right of this edge. Okay, now, and I still see this. I see this negative space that is right here. And it's defined by the edge of the leg and a little bit of the body, and then the top of the tree branch. And that's right here. All right, so I have that maintained, and then I can start sketching the toes. Now I have this teeny tiny reference photo printed out just so I can show you things. But I do have also, sometimes things might be a little bit hard to see the way this is. And so I do have the image on my computer as well, just so I can see some of those smaller parts in a little bit greater detail. And it looks like he's got like one part of one of his toes wrapped around or hidden behind the branch. And then he's got a little toe right about here. And then the longer toe beside it. All right, we're not going to get super detailed here because I'm drawing on a very small space, very small area here. And if I had a larger piece of paper that I was drawing on, then I could get way more detailed, and especially if I was just creating a more realistic drawing. But again, we're just trying to keep this simple. Okay, now on this side, we've got the other foot. Right, easy enough. Got the same thing. You've got like a long toe that comes all the way down the width of the branch, and then a toe beside it that's not quite as long. All right, so we've got a nice little outline in place so far for the toucan and the toucan and the branch. So we're gonna go ahead and look at. I'm just gonna put a few of these leaves in place because I think it'll really help add to the composition and just help us better relate to his overall habitat here. All right, so I don't think I'm gonna get super precise with these leaves, but I do want to. I'm gonna keep it kind of rough, but still I want to maintain a decent level of accuracy with the placement of everything. So, and I'm just going to use the same principles to help us put in place the outer shape of these big leaves here. I'm going to do a quick sketch, a very quick sketch of the general shape of the leaves that I see. And then I'm going to make some tweaks here and there of the placement as I get things in place a little bit better. We're still using the negative space that I see around our subject, in this case the leaves. I'm using that negative space to help guide me and help me make decisions as to where and how I should shape these particular leaves. And for example, I see some negative space right here, defined by the edges of the leaves and the branch. And then here's another, see lots of triangles in this. We see lots of triangles that create the negative space that can help us form our leaves in this case. Okay, and then we see this leaf. It looks like it comes down just past that lower edge of the branch. The tip of this leaf comes down just past that lower edge of the branch. And we bring it back up here. And then we see if we look at the negative space that's right here, to the right of this leaf, looks like something somewhat of a kind of a trapezoid, kind of with curved edges here. Okay, and it looks like this upper edge is maybe a little bit higher than the edge of the beak. Now, but if I have the edge of my beak right here, that means I need to bring this up a little bit higher than what I have it here. And I may have to bring some of this up a little bit higher too. And something I always want you to keep in mind, and I've alluded to this a couple of times, at least so far in this video, that your drawing doesn't have to match the reference photo exactly. You can decide how much or how little you want your drawing to represent the reference photo, or you could use the reference as inspiration to influence your drawing, but you can always deviate as much from the reference photo as you want. You can always, put your own creativity in into your own drawing just to make it your own a little bit. That's always an option for you. That way, it loosens things up and it frees you from having to be so committed to, or having to be so pressured to getting your drawing just right, just like the reference photo. If realism is your goal, and if you're trying to get it close to the reference photo, that's one thing. But you can always, make your own little tweaks here and there just to make things your own, and then you might feel a little bit more freedom, a little bit less like, oh gosh, I've got to get this exactly like the reference, or it's just not going to be a good drawing. It can still be an excellent drawing, even if you make things your own. Even if you, let's say you wanted to draw the head of the toucan angled up a little bit higher, or you wanted to put more leaves or fewer leaves, or you wanted to put the leaves in a different position, or you wanted to change the angle of the branch. All that is completely up to you as the artist, and you should feel perfectly comfortable with doing those things in your drawing if you so desire to. All right, I'll put a few of the outlines here and the background, the leaf outlines here in the background also. And these are a little bit blurrier in our reference because they're out of focus, and we don't want them to distract from our focal point of our drawing, in this case the toucan, and the branch and the leaves are the foreground. Okay, but I still want to indicate a few of them just the same. Maybe I could be a little bit less exact with these leaves that are just kind of hanging out in the background. Okay, so now we have a pretty decent outline for our toucan in a tree drawing. We have the main contours in place for the toucan itself, for the branch, and for the leaves. So that's good. That's one of the most important things to do. One of the most important steps. And you know what? I think, as I look at this before I change things, I think I'm going to bring my, let's see. Actually, no, I'm good. Never mind. I was seeing things that weren't there, which happens a lot of times in these drawings. So anyway, so we have our main outline in place. So now the next step, I'm going to erase some of these guidelines. I'm just going to use my kneaded eraser for this. You can use a regular eraser as well. It'll be just fine. But for the most part, I think now that we have these major outlines in place, we don't have to be quite as reliant on these guidelines. Now, if you wanted to keep some of them in place a little bit longer, you could do that too. If if you're drawing along with me and you decide to use these guidelines. But I'm going to go ahead and just try to get rid of them for the most part. If I accidentally erase some of my outlines, I'll just put them back in place. Now, sometimes you might find that you want to keep these outlines in place a little bit longer because depending on the complexity of the subject that you're drawing or sketching, you might want to put some of the shading contours, which we're going to get into pretty soon here. But by shading contours, I mean some of these edges that define where these values shift from a little bit lighter to a little bit darker. Sometimes we want to put them in place on this contour drawing before we actually start shading. And if you have a really complex drawing, I've seen people do that with more complex drawings. In this case, it's pretty, there aren't a whole lot of, there's not a ton of switches in the values that we can't readily identify just with our outline. So it's not necessary to really keep this in place. But sometimes the extra guidelines help, or sometimes they get in the way. It just kind of depends on you as the artist and what is most beneficial for you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and also erase these guidelines here that are hidden behind this branch, because we don't need that anymore. Okay, and I'll also go ahead and just erase the line here. That's the lines of the branch that are hidden behind this leaf. Okay, so that gives us our outline, and the next step is to focus on our shading. Now, with the shading, we can take a look at the other reference photo that's provided here. And this is our reference photo that has the simplified values. There are 5 very simplified values here. So all of the variations from the original reference, they're just broken down into very basic. The white is white, and the dark is dark, and then we have midtones and the variations in between. One way that I often look at this is when I use this to help me is I assign different pencil grades to each value. So this isn't necessary. Let me just preface by saying there are different ways to do this. You could decide yourself what kind of ranges or pencils you want to use. You could even just use one pencil throughout the whole thing, and then you can just make the various adjustments with your one pencil when you get to the darker ones as opposed to the lighter ones. But what I often like to do with this is to if we look at the Toucan right here, we can see these 5 values on display. We see the whitest white here, and then we see this slightly lighter value. I might want to, and I've been using an HB so far, an HB pencil the entire time. I might want to stick with the HB for this value. And here's a midtone that's slightly darker. I might want to use 2B for those. And then we see something slightly darker right here. So maybe this one will be a 4B. Kind of hard to see here. With that, maybe I'll use a pen. I don't know if it'll show up a little bit better. Might not be able to see that very well, but we have HB, 2B, and 4B. And then for the darkest value, I might use a 6B, for example. Okay, but this is not, these are not hard and fast rules where, I say, I must switch to a 4B if I see this value here. And then there's no, there's no other way about it. That's not the case. You could definitely, there's a lot of leeway where you could not necessarily stick to that. Again, you decide as the artist. And not only that, but we can't just use this in isolation. We have to continue looking at the original reference photo too, because we want to see, like, for example, a lot of these transitions from one value to the next, they're not this sudden. They're often much gradual, and we can definitely see this when we look at this white area on the toucan. These value changes are so gradual and subtle that we barely see where one value stops and one value starts, as opposed to this here. So we use this as a guide, but it's not the end-all be-all. We still have to look at the original reference. And we have to be mindful of when we see those smooth transitions from one value to the next. And we want to keep that in mind when we do our drawing. So again, just use this as a tool to help you if you want, but it's not necessary to just be super exact with it. And again, give yourself some room, some flexibility if you want to just stick with one pencil, or you want to change these values. Maybe you want to, maybe for your drawing, you're just using all H pencils. So because you want the whole thing to have like a lighter feel, a softer feel to it. I don't know if softer is the right word for it or not, but, or maybe you want darker values. Maybe you want to use 9B for the darkest values, or like a colored pencil or a carbon pencil or something like that. But you decide as the artist. But just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use this to help guide me, and you can feel free to draw along with me. Now, as far as where to start, you can decide what works best for you. There's no right or wrong answer about this. Some people like to start opposite of their dominant hand. Since I'm right-handed, that means I might want to start on the left and work my way to the right, just so I don't smudge the paper as much. It's also helpful to have a piece of paper, or just a scrap piece of paper or something to use underneath your hand so you don't smudge as much. But that's one option as far as working left to right or right to left if you're left-handed. Some people prefer just to start with their main subject and just shade that first and then go to the outside. Some people like to work from the background and then work their way to the foreground. Some people like to sketch, to shade light to dark. Some people like to shade dark to light. I'm not going to say there's one right way or wrong way to do it. I've done all of those variations. For me, it's just kind of, I haven't yet committed to one way that I consistently do it. For me, it's personally kind of what I'm feeling at the time, at the moment. So I think, my best advice I can give now is just to experiment with different ones, different approaches, and find what works best for you. For this, I haven't really decided yet, but I think I'm just going to kind of start in the background and kind of on the left side and kind of go from there. All right, so I'm going to look at this this upper leaf here, and this leaf, even though it's in the background, is kind of in the foreground too, because it's a little. If you look at the reference photo, it's a little bit more in focus than the some of the other leaves we see back here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to be incredibly painstakingly accurate with some of the shading. Again, I want this to be somewhat realistic, but it's also going to be more of a sketchier type drawing too. So just so I don't spend too much time on it, because I could easily spend hours, but I don't want that to be that type of drawing for this. Yeah, as we're looking at this leaf, it looks like we've got some look at some of our 4B tones, using what I assigned earlier, our 4B tones kind of around this. And it's a little misleading, or kind of maybe it's a bit of an optical illusion, that this darkest value here is, this is actually our darkest, like our 6B. I know that, at least in my eyes, it looks a little bit lighter than what we see here. That's probably a bit of our kind of our eyes playing tricks on us, since there's so many of the lighter values around here, which makes this appear darker. Or it could just be that my printer is on the fritz here and we see the streaks here. So I don't think that's it though, because it looks the same on my computer screen as I look at it. It's a bit of an optical illusion, but this value here is actually just as dark as this. And so that's kind of our darkest 6Bs there. But again, we're just going to use this as a guide to help us decide what to put here. So we've got a lot of 4B and 6B that I'll use here to help define this leaf. But we also have a few highlights too. I still have my HB here, and I'm just going to slowly work my way up to the darker values. And I'm using the HB to help me sketch in some of the finer details of this leaf, especially around those highlights. And I'm just kind of starting with the HB just to help me just put in a little bit of a base layer just to get things started. It's not always necessary, but it does help. And then I can gradually layer over some darker tones with some of the other pencils. All right, so I've got a 2B, and I'm just kind of working my way up to some of the darker tones here, just little by little. It's not always necessary to do it pencil by pencil like this, but I often like to do it. It is more time consuming, so I probably won't be doing this for all of them, but it's kind of old habits. Kind of an old habits is hard to break type of thing. All right, so All right, now I've got my 4B pencil. Okay, and I've got these some of these darkest values established with 4B, and I'm going to gently start shading in some of the lighter areas too. And now my 6B I'll use for the darkest shadows on this leaf. Now there are also some background tones where if I were working on shading the background, which I'm not going to do that in this drawing, but if I were to do that, then this would provide some good contrast here. If I could put some darker tones here, it would provide some good contrast for this edge. But since I'm not doing that, I'm not doing the background in this, I'm just going to very gently indicate some of those edges, and just with some soft marks, just so there's not too much of a harsh, sharp outline there. All right, now some of these other leaves here, I want to be a little bit more subtle about them because they're kind of in the background. They're a little bit blurred out in the drawing. So I'm going to try to be a little bit brief with those if I can. And just a little bit suggestive of them without actually getting into too much detail. All right, so we have here our values. We see kind of an HB. We see kind of a 2B value here also. All right, so I'm going to start here with the HB. Now the lightest values are kind of like right here along this edge of this leaf, but I'm still going to just stick with the HB at first just to create some base layer tones here. And I'm just going to start using kind of the side of my pencil to make things go a little bit faster, and then it'll help me just be a little bit less. I can, just kind of have a little bit more of that kind of blurry effect too, which I want to keep the values in the background a little bit lighter, because the lighter values implies distance more than the darker values. The darker values implies closeness when it comes to distance when you're comparing background and foreground objects in a drawing. All right, so still using HB, but start putting in some tones here for the this other leaf, and I'm being kind of loose here, but I'm just kind of marking in some of these darker tones that we see on the leaf itself. All right, and then for some of the lighter areas, I'm just going to start kind of shading in some of those open spaces. very lightly with HB. Okay, then I'm going to come back with the 2B pencil and looking at this edge here, and I want to, we can see here how it's a little bit lighter on this leaf, and then there's a darker edge here. It helps to define this lighter edge. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. Just going along that edge, and I'm just going to pull away from it a little bit. Right, and then up here, go ahead and glaze over some of these darker bits, darker shadow areas on the leaf. Okay, I still don't want to get too carried away there because I want to keep it kind of hazy back there if I can. All right, I'm just going to do a little bit more of that with some of these other leaves here in the background. Same kind of thing. I think I'll just kind of start with the HB pencil. Just going to block in some rough tones here, some lighter tones here. And then where I see some of the darker shadows or darker tones, still using the HB pencil, but I often like to use it as, you know, just kind of establishing like that base layer of shading. And then I like to build upon it with the other pencil grades. Just to kind of get me started with some of these. So I'm kind of looking at some of these shadow areas, some of the shadow areas here in the background on the leaves, even though our simplified shading reference shows some of the darker values. I'm still starting with the HB just to get things going, and then I can kind of go over it with some of the darker pencils. That's just my usual approach. I mean, I'm not saying it's the right way or the only way to do it, but it's just what I find myself doing most of the time. And in this case, I think it's good too, just because, again, I want some of those distant, I want some of these distant leaves to still appear kind of distant. So it's kind of good to keep them a little bit on the lighter side, even though this might indicate some darker values. Again, we want to keep looking at our original reference photo, and we can see that some of these values, they're a little lighter just because they're more distant. So sticking with the HB pencil in spite of what we're seeing here is I still think a good idea, and at least to start things off, and then we can go back and layer on top of it as needed. So I'm going to keep going here and do the same thing with these other leaves. I also like to look at the lines, these lines that are along each side of the leaf. These ruffles or veins, if you will. I don't know. They look more like thick ruffles, but because these are pretty big leaves, but don't know the exact terminology for these. But I want to try to mimic. I want my pencil markings to kind of mimic what I'm seeing with the reference and with the direction that those marks are going. Okay, and then we have this other leaf on this side. Do kind of the same thing. And I'm just putting some of the basic shapes of some of these shadows in place with the HB pencil at first. And then I'm kind of going back. And like now I've got my 2B pencil, and I'm just going to look for some of those slightly darker areas and just reinforce them a little bit. That's pretty much all we're doing here. And then we just work our way up with other pencils, like the 4B and the 6B after that. And it's not super exact compared to the reference, but that's okay. And like we said, we don't want. I want these other leaves to be just a little bit more vague anyway. So I'm probably not going to spend too much more time on these back leaves because I just want to do just enough to imply what we're seeing back there. And we don't have to get too carried away with them all. Okay. And what I might do here, I'm just going to soften up the edge of that leaf. Well, I use our HB just to very lightly indicate the very softly indicate the edges of the leaf. And what I might do here also is, now that we have some of the darker tones in place of the leaves, with the 2B, I might just go back and very gently with the HB pencil. That's 2B actually. With the HB pencil, I may go back very gently, kind of fill in some of those white spaces. All right, and then I'll just go ahead and we see here on our simplified shading reference that we see a lot of 4B values here too. So I'm not going to put a ton. I'm going to put just a few here and there, maybe some of the darkest spots. But again, I don't want to go too crazy with the distant shadows. So I'm going to just use it very sparingly. And pretty much I think we keep it like that, just to keep it kind of vague and distant. And now that we're working on the foreground, I could be a little more intentional with some of these darker values. Getting rid of a little bit more of the guidelines there. All right, so we'll go ahead and start working on the actual toucan. Now, looking at this eye, I already have the circle in place, and that can be for the outer edge of the eye. Now, for the inner edge, we've got this bright, big, bright black pupil, and there is a bit of a highlight. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a bit of a highlight that's within that black circle. And it's really helpful to include that highlight because it just adds a little bit more realism to the drawing. So rather than shade the whole thing in with black and then have to erase it, I'm just going to just take a mental note of where that highlight is within that circle, which I didn't even draw the black circle yet, but as I draw the black circle, and since this is a very tiny space that I'm working on, I have to be careful, but I'm going to just kind of shade around where I want that highlight to be. I'm just making a kind of a round, I'm using my 6B pencil now, just kind of a round circle around there, but I'm being very careful to leave a tiny white space within the black circle that I'm making so that can serve as our highlight. I think it's much easier to do it this way than it would be to make the whole thing black and then try to erase it. Okay, and then I'm going to switch to my HB pencil. And again, this is so tiny that we can't get a ton of detail in here, but if it were a larger drawing, then we could get a little bit more detail in here. But I'm just going to indicate the little kind of round ring that's around that eye. All right, now looking here, we can look at this. Now on our reference photo, I think I called it white a couple of times because it looks white on the black and white reference. But on our color reference photo, we can clearly see that this isn't white, it's yellow. So whenever I say or white, or when I mentioned that earlier in the video, I just know that I just mean this area of the toucan that looks white on our black and white reference, but it's actually yellow. So anyway, looking at this patch, we're going to see that we've got the brightest values, the lightest values right here, just underneath where the head is. And then we very gradually get a little bit darker and a little bit darker because it curves around here. And then we get darker a little bit when we go to the face. And we can see these kind of vertical streaks. Now, if we maintain some of those streaks, that can help us, that can help to indicate some of or to help give us a bit of a feel for the texture of the feathers. So if we, as we're sketching this or shading this, if we use some of those same vertical marks, that's going to help us mimic some of that feathery texture that we see there. All right, so I've got my HB pencil and I am going to use this as my guide, and I'm just going to kind of start around right about here. And it's going to kind of create some of that same edge. But I want it to be super soft and gradual. So instead of using the point of my pencil, I think I'm going to use the side like I've been doing. And I want to be very gentle and gradual here with the marks. And I want to keep looking at the original reference too. And bear in mind that it's even way more subtle in the original reference. So I want to be very careful about how I shade this. It's barely even noticeable here. And as we get closer to the bottom edge, we see it gets a little bit darker. All right, so even what I have here might be a little bit more than what we see on the reference. But, and I'm not using any blending tools with this drawing. I'm not using blending stump or tortillions or anything like that. If I were, then I could probably get things a little bit more smooth, a little bit smoother. But for the purposes of this drawing, I think this is a good happy medium between what I see on this reference and what I see on the original. And I'm going to use my 2B pencil to put a little bit of the darker tones near the bottom, very gently. All right, and then just kind of the same thing underneath the beak. All right, then I'll stick with my HB pencil for just some of these other values here around the eye and around the beak. And I'm going to, now as I get to the beak itself, I'm going to, I think I'm going to pull this black strip a little bit closer to the eye, because I see on the reference it's a little bit closer to the eye than what I have it here. I'm starting with the HB just to get my placement correct. But it's a very dark mark, so I'm going to, once I'm satisfied with the shape of my line, I'll go back over it with the 6B, make it nice and dark. All right, so there we go with that. All right, now looking at the beak itself, we've got some nice colors going on here. And now this is where sometimes it's helpful to have a color reference. That's why I like to supply the color reference photo just alongside the black and white. And again, it's not super mandatory, but in this case, it's just helpful to see, like if we look at the color reference photo, we see there's the different colors in the beak. Like we've got orange here, and we've got light green, and then we've got some light blue here. But here in the black and white, we can barely see that. It looks like the orange and the green are the same value. They're the same tone. So, I mean, really, the black and white reference photo, since we're using a black and white medium, this is more ideal, but it's still helpful and it's still interesting to know what's actually there if we have the different colors. And here we can see there's some variation because it just shows up here in the other version. But looking here at the beak, I'm going to use this as my guideline. And then I'm going to use what I see in the color reference just to better shape this. Just so we can distinguish it. Because I think that's helpful to see in our toucan, especially in the subject, even though they're almost the same value. All right, so I'll use my my HB, my 2B pencil to get most of those values in place. I'll start with the HB. All right, and then with the 2B, we'll go ahead and start putting in some of those darker values underneath the beak. And here on top. I'm going to kind of still try to, I'm going to keep the value close to what we see with the rest of the beak, but I'm going to try to shape it like that orange shape that we see in the color reference. Just so it still looks about the same value as the rest of the beak, but we can still see that shape there. Now, we also have some interesting little marks here along the beak. Now I'm going to try to draw this this curve of the beak. And I'm going to try to indicate some of these kind of like little triangular shapes that we see. This is an important characteristic of the beak. We don't have to get it. We don't have to get it exact. We don't have to get the exact number unless you're striving for that level of realism. It all depends on how much realism you want to have in your drawing and how much time you are willing to commit to it. All right, so I think that's good enough for the little stripes. I'm using a 2B pencil at the moment. Okay, now there's also this color on the tip of the beak. It's a little bit darker along the bottom edge. And we get a little bit lighter as the light hits it here. Okay, now there's a nice little highlight along this edge of the top edge of the beak. And again, if I were doing the background, I could put some contrast there to make it show up a little bit better. But now that we're not doing that, I'm just going to try to soften up that edge. I'm using an HB pencil here. And then I want to just create a little more shadow just underneath it. Just underneath that upper rim, just so that highlight stands out a little bit more. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's enough to get the job done. Okay, so now that we've got that in place, we've got the let's see. Actually, I'm going to use my kneaded eraser to I want to indicate that highlight a little bit more. Okay, it's gonna have to do for now. All right. Anyway, I'm gonna now is the now we get to the hard part, and I mean that jokingly because This is probably the easy part. We've got so much dark value here in the body that we can almost essentially just color this in. And now if we look really closely at the reference, you can kind of see it here, but you can probably see it better if on the color reference if you zoom in. But there are a few little lighter highlights within this black, within the black feathers that we can see here. But so we can kind of, and there's also, and again, it's hard to see in the black and white, but there's some like red, we have some red feathers along this bottom edge of where the yellow feathers are, and right along the bottom edge of the body, there's some red feathers. Kind of hard to see on the reference here, but so those are some things we can keep in mind as we do our shading. So I'm just gonna start with a 4B pencil here, and I'm gonna start filling in all of this. And I'm gonna use the 4B for my base layer. I'm gonna fill in all this black area, or almost all of it. Might leave a few little streaks here and there, like those ones that I just mentioned that we barely can see, but just to show a few little tiny highlights within all of the black feathers, but it's going to be barely noticeable there. Right, so I'm just kind of shading around them right now. And I want to keep like a nice sharp edge around here because it looks like a nice clean edge on the reference where the red and yellow feathers meet the black. So I want to maintain that edge. And I should do that along the top too. And even though these values are very dark, you see that I'm still trying to stay true to the direction of the feathers and their growth. And I'm trying to make my pencil marks stay consistent with the direction that we see the feathers flowing on the body. Even though this is a very small, minor detail, it may not seem important, but I think it's very important because it just helps, even on a very subtle level, it helps to create texture. Even though we can barely see any texture in the body, it still helps nonetheless to create that feel or that look of that feathery texture that is part of our toucan. I think every pencil stroke helps, and it matters when it comes to trying to replicate a certain texture of whatever subject you're trying to draw, even if it's very subtle and you can barely see it, and like in this case. Now here on our reference, we see kind of like a hazy, maybe something in the foreground. It's kind of up to you if you want to include that or not. I mean, I kind of want to just make the whole tail here and not really worry about that. So I think in my drawing, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to kind of ignore this part and just fill this in so I have the whole tail. Again, it's up to you as to whether you want to do that or not. You can decide that for yourself. I think in this case, in my drawing, I'm only including a few of the leaves in the background, and there aren't any leaves that we can see here. And I'm not making the other background of the forest. I think it just makes sense in my case just for me to fill that in and pretend that other part of the leaf there is not there in the foreground. But that's just what I'm going with. Okay, so now, as you can see, I left a few spaces open just to indicate a few little subtle highlights in the black part of the body, but I shaded everything around it with the 4B, and now I'm using the 6B pencil to go over it once again. And I'm going to use these for my darkest tones for the toucan's body. We have those nice black feathers there. And I might leave a few gaps here and there just in the shading for some of that 4B, some of the 4B graphite to show through, just as additional highlights, just to add a little bit more realism there. But I am using the same pencil strokes. That's you going the same direction. I'm not going sideways or crisscross or anything like that. Okay, and I want to maintain this nice edge along where the lighter feathers meet the darker black feathers. Okay, and then we'll continue along the tail at the bottom, and notice how I'm just I want to create some contrast there along where that branch is. So that's why I started using these these marks at an angle, because I want to reinforce the edge of the tree branch before I continue the vertical marks of the toucan's tail. All right, and that pretty much does it for the toucan. We still have to do the feet, and there's not a ton of detail that we need to put here, because in my case this drawing is so small. But I do see on our one of our reference photos, we do see some shadow close to the bottom and along the left side of the toes over here, and a few highlights. So we're just gonna, and some markings along the top edge. So we're gonna put some of those in place. I've got my 2B pencil. Okay, just to help me place some of the initial shadow. All right, and then we've got, I'll go ahead and use my HB pencil to kind of fill in some of the midtones and some of the values of some of the shading that represents the actual color of the feet. All right, and we'll try to put a few of these markings along here too. Just some very subtle kind of horizontal markings here and there. And lastly, I would like to, at least along the right foot here, I'd like to create a little bit more contrast here. Have that foot stand out a little bit more. Going over some of this a little bit more with the 6B, the body. All right, okay, so I'm going to just kind of sharpen up the outer edges of the tail a little bit. Just to make it a little more crisp. You can do that along the body too. My pencil isn't super sharp, so that's why it looks a little bit fuzzy, but that's okay. All right, but I think that pretty much does it for the toucan itself. The only thing that's left is we've got the tree branch and the other leaves here on the side. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the branch itself. If we look here, we have, this is even on the simplified version of our reference photo, we have a ton of variations here. We've got, and that's because, just the texture of the bark itself. There's just a lot of things happening here with the different varieties of the highlights and the shadows going into and out of each other. So anyway, I'm just going to use this as a rough guide. We see the highlights along the top edge of the branch. We see some midtones along the middle, and we see the shadows, the core shadows along the bottom edge. So we're just going to kind of use that as our guideline, and we can just use a mixture from HB all the way up to our 6Bs for the bark, because all of those values are in there. So I'll start with the HB pencil, and I'm just going to create some base layer here, shading in the direction of the branch itself. And I guess it kind of helps you use, instead of just sideways marks, just to help with the texture, I'm just kind of creating some choppy circular markings here and there, and that might help us replicate that bark a little bit better. And I'm leaving, you might notice here that, and this was intentional, a little bit of a white space here along that upper edge, and because that's where the lightest parts of the branch lie, where those highlights are. All right, and what I'd also like to do here is, okay, if we look at the leaves here in the background, even though they're kind of blurry, I want the edge of the branch to be a little bit more crisp here and stand out in the foreground. So what I might do is just trace along that edge of the branch and then just pull the tones back a little bit into the background. Just so the edge of the branch can stand out a little bit more. Okay, and then I can use my kneaded eraser just in a wedge shape to kind of trace just underneath, rub just underneath that line, that edge that I created. And then I can go back on the branch, shade just a little bit underneath that white strip. Okay, so there we go with that. Probably have to do the same thing on the bottom. Just kind of trace along that bottom edge and just pull down a little bit, pull those values down into the background. And do the same thing here a little bit. But here, at this point, it's going to be a little bit easier because here the shadow, the core shadow on the branch itself is so much darker than the leaves here in the background that it's going to be easy to maintain this edge, this bottom edge of the branch, because you can just put the shadow directly on the branch itself. Whereas here we need a little bit of help because there was a highlight along the top edge of the branch, so we needed a little bit of help by putting some more shadow on the background. Now I can hear there's some more shadow on the branch too, so we can make this a little bit darker also. But all right, I'm going to work my way up to that. We've got the 2B pencil now, and we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing we did with the HB, but we're not going to go quite as high. We're going to keep it a little bit lower on the branch, along that lower, a little bit closer to that lower edge, using kind of the same choppy circular markings. Okay, I'm not going to be too incredibly detailed with keeping the marks exactly like I see on the reference. We're just going to do enough to just suggest the bark itself. Okay, now I've got the 4B. And we can see where our darker shadow tones are starting to, they're getting concentrated close to the foot here. And then just all along the bottom edge here on the right side of the of the drawing. Okay, we can start defining that bottom edge of the branch a little bit more too. Still trying to keep it kind of low here on the closer to the lower edge of the branch. See some shadow here in between the toes, in between the toucan's toes. Okay, and then we've got our 6B pencil for going with the darkest shadows along the bottom. And you might see me to start putting some kind of vertical-ish lines along this too, just to help a little bit more with that create that dark bark texture. Just a little bit, some bumps, wrinkles here and there, and you can see like the different values, different pencil grades starting just to play around with each other and really help to create that texture of the branch. All right, and then I'll go through here on the HB, just put a little bit more, just go into the highlighted area a little bit more here, just suggest some of the markings here and there in the highlighted space up there. All right, so now we've got our branch. Actually, there's a little bit something, it's almost like a smaller branch down here that I almost missed. Okay, all right. So pretty much all that's left here is the leaves on the upper right side. All right, so we're going to go ahead and look at our reference photo, our simplified values. We have a lot of lighter values here, the openings of the leaves, and a few darker, like maybe 4B or 6B, and some of the curled up parts of the leaf here in between. All right, so we'll go ahead and continue doing what we've been doing. I like to start with the HB pencil and just establish a kind of a baseline for shading. I have a nice little highlighted rim here too that we see along this leaf. Okay, and then I'm going to pull from that and make a few little darker streaks. Right, then we have a kind of a darker leaf in the back. Okay, again, we want to be just keep in mind the direction of our pencil strokes, and we want to try to have them match the ripples or the ruffles that we see on the leaf. All right, so here on this second leaf, again, we see some kind of some white highlights or some lighter colored highlights along the edge of the leaf where it's folded and curled up. And then we can just sketch in some of the dark little just little marks along the leaf. All right, again, this is all right now just my HB pencil. I'm just putting some base tones down. Here we've got one more leaf on this side, actually two more leaves. Okay, and we have all these nice little ripples on the leaf, and we see the lines kind of spiraling. They start up here, kind of going at an angle upward, and then we gradually see them starting to angle further and further downward. All right, and then we have a kind of another leaf here on the side that's just kind of hanging off the edge. All right, so that does it as far as just getting things started. And I'll go ahead and switch to our 2B pencil and just try to reinforce some of these darker values in here. And then for our highlighted edge here, I want to try to pull the darker values away from this highlighted edge of the leaf here a little bit into the closer to the left side. And we can trace along this edge with the tip of our pencil, like a darker pencil like this 2B. And again, just pull those values away from that highlighted edge to the left side, just to make that highlight a little bit sharper. And looks like we can do the same thing up here. Kind of lost it up here a little bit. All right, and we're getting close to the end here, and we don't have to get super detailed with a lot of this. We don't want it to distract too much from our main focus of the toucan, but since they are in the foreground, I do want to put a little bit more, at least a little bit more detail in these leaves than I did with the ones in the background. But again, we can do just enough to suggest them, and we don't have to feel like we have to get too carried away with them to still have a decent drawing on our hands. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to my 4B and get in some of these darkest shadow areas. And we use it to help us establish some of the edges a little bit better. And we're going to put a little bit more shadow on, I think, on the side of this leaf. I can kind of see some of the darker tones just along that edge, just kind of traveling along that edge there. All right, so all right, I think we're just about finished. I'm going to take my eraser and just go over the background one last time. Just trying to pick up any accidental smudges. And also I can use my eraser pen or a kneaded eraser, but I'll use my eraser pen here just to get along some of the tighter edges. And as I always say, you can take a drawing as far as you want to take it. Like you can, the more time you spend on a drawing, that goes a long way towards creating a more realistic drawing. So, we could easily spend many more hours on this if we wanted to, and it could be incredibly realistic. But this is a nice balance between kind of something like a looser sketch and a more realistic drawing, because it's still kind of sketchy, but it still has realistic qualities to it. But you can always take your drawing as far as you want to take it, or if you don't want to take it as far and you want to be a little less detailed with it, that's always a good option too, if you so choose that. Okay, just brush off the residue there. Okay, but all right, I think that pretty much does it for this drawing. I hope you were able to draw along with me, or at least pick up a tip or two. And anyway, this was fun to do, and I hope you were able to learn something from it. And thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And I know it's been a while since I've made been quite a while since I made a video like this, but I definitely hope to get back into it and do it more often. So until next time, until the next video, I hope you continue to take care and continue to keep drawing, and I will see you very soon.